Colorado last month, there was a massive environmental disaster. 3 million gallons of polluted mine wastewater spilled into the Animas River in a matter of hours. It was the worst ecological catastrophe in the region in recent memory. The spill released a mustard-colored plume in the regional river system stretching some 80 miles long. So what caused the accident? What caused the accident? The Environmental Protection Agency. My colleagues and I often disagree on the merits of EPA's action. However, I'm certain that everyone in this room can agree that EPA should not be making the environment worse. We are here to examine how this disaster happened. We're also here to examine how it was managed. And most importantly, we're here to make sure it never ever happens again. The EPA must be held fully accountable for the accident. Last year, a private company in West Virginia accidentally released roughly 7,500 gallons of chemicals into the river. Remember, this spill was 3 million gallons. The EPA immediately began a criminal investigation. The EPA built a case against the company that resulted in a criminal indictment for 6 employees. The company was forced to declare bankruptcy. In 1999, a private company in Alaska inadvertently spilled 1,500 gallons of oil into a nearby river. The project manager of the site was sentenced to prison for 6 months. And yet I've heard the EPA administrator go on television saying, we hold our people to an even higher standard. I'm not aware of anybody who's been dismissed, held accountable, let alone given some criminal charges along the way. In the aftermath of the Deep Horizon oil spill in 2010, President Obama demanded that those responsible be held fully accountable. When asked if he would fire the CEO of the company responsible, President Obama said, quote, he wouldn't be working for me, end quote. Has anything happened to any of the EPA employees who are responsible for this? Not a thing. The EPA should not get special treatment or avoid the consequences they instituted on others. One of the more offensive things that I heard as I visited with the president of the Navajo Nation, who was deeply affected by this, is that days after this, we had EPA employees walking the banks of the river, not there to do a cleanup, not there to help with the cows and the cattle and other things, but they were out there handing out these waiver forms, trying to get a waiver form signed to limit the liability. Days after this happened, many of these people don't even speak English, and yet you had employees of the federal government working for you out there trying to limit their liability. That is so fundamentally, totally wrong and offensive. Did the EPA call the Navajo Nation to let them know what was happening right away? No, it was 48 hours until you bothered to even make contact with the Navajo Nation. And then, when you offered support, 2 people came down, 2, to go sit in the control center, basically to spy and to see what was going on there. They weren't down there working hard to get this thing cleaned up, and we're going to hear from the president of the Navajo Nation. He's the one that told us about this and what's going on. You could shake your head no, but that's exactly what happened, and it's highly offensive. Hand out waiver forms. Try to limit the liability instead of taking care of what you knew was happening more than a year in advance. More than a year in advance. And that's what's so deeply concerning here. One other point that I'd like to make as we go along in this. In June of 2014, the EPA contracted with the Environmental Restoration, the company, to work the Gold King mine. In the contract, again, a year in advance, more than a year in advance, the contract says, quote, conditions may exist that could result in a blowout of the blockages and cause a release of large volumes of contaminated mine waters and sediment from inside the mine which contain concentrated heavy metals, end quote. They knew this was a distinct possibility. They knew that this was going to happen more than a year in advance, and yet obviously they did not take the necessary precautions to make sure that this did not happen. We want to have some answers to that and a host of other questions. We do appreciate you being here today. Look forward to a lively discussion. Governor, you've apologized, correct?
Correct.
Have there been people that have been fired?
Correct.
Anybody also dismissed or otherwise retired?
Yes.
Did the state of Michigan do something wrong?
Yes.
Administrator McCarthy, the EPA in your mind, did the EPA do anything wrong?
I don't know whether we did everything right. That's the challenge that I'm facing.
Now, the challenge you're facing right now is my question. And my question is, did the EPA do anything wrong?
I think we could have been, I would hope that we would have been more aggressive. I would hope that we would have escalated this issue. If we could have done absolutely anything to stand on a rooftop and scream about the challenges we're having and the concerns, we should have done it.
Okay, so you're just not, here's the fundamental difference. First of all, we have jurisdiction here in Congress on the EPA. I don't have jurisdiction on the governor. I don't have jurisdiction on, I have jurisdiction to call him up here, and Republicans did call him up here. He volunteered to be here, and we are investigating. This is our third hearing on this topic. But here's the fundamental difference, and I hope you and I hope everybody understands this. I see responsibility. I see people that are getting fired. I see changes. I see an admission that there was fundamental wrong that happened in the organization. But then when I turn to the EPA, has anybody been fired? That's a question.
No, sir.
Has anybody been dismissed?
No, sir.
When the EPA Region 5 administrator there, Susan Hedman, the day you finally did take decisive action, when you were questioned about that, you said that her act of stepping down was courageous.
I did.
I'm going to ask you again. Did the EPA do anything wrong?
The EPA worked very hard. Let me make one
Okay, no.
Let me make one
No, because I have another question for you. No, hold on.
Okay.
Did the, Mark Edwards has testified here twice. He doesn't have a dog in this fight other than he wants good quality health for people, and he wants good clean water. And he happens to know the science behind the water. On those two hearings, did Mr. Edwards say anything that you think was wrong, or maybe you don't, or inaccurate? Do you think Mr. Edwards said anything that was inaccurate or wrong in those two testimonies?
I think he was not at all informed about what EPA did. I think he knows nothing about the law, which he readily admits.
He knows
He doesn't
nothing.
know how we're supposed to work in the system. He doesn't understand that the problem itself was the responsibility of the states. Oversight was our responsibility. We took that seriously, and we conducted it. Does that mean I don't have regrets? Because I'd really like
No,
to
that's a
step
whole
back
different
here, sir.
standard. Everybody can say that's cheap. Oh yeah, we just got regrets. No, that's cheap. That's cheap.
Well, so you have to look at how the law works, and we did.
Yeah, you know what? And it failed. You failed. You said, quote, if there is anything I could do, if there was any switch I could pull,
Yeah.
you had that under the law and you didn't do it.
No, sir, I did not have that under the law.
Yes, you did. If
I
there
had
is an
enforcement
imminent threat,
authority.
if there is an imminent threat, you can pull that switch. And
Only
you finally
if we
did in
also-
January.
only if we-
Administrator, you are wrong.
There's two parts to that, sir. You skipped the second.
What's the second part?
You need to have the information to determine an imminent
And
substantial
so
threat.
why do we
which
even need an
we
EPA?
did-
If you can't do
I'm
that,
sorry.
you were in those homes.
Let
No,
me take
I
this
am
one
asking the questions.
Okay.
Yes, okay. In February is when you first arrived on the scene, and it wasn't until January of the next year that you actually did something. That's the fundamental problem. Don't look around like you're mystified. That's what happened. Miguel Del Toro showed up in February. You didn't take action. You didn't. And you could have pulled that
We
switch.
consistently took action from that point forward.
There are a lot of people in this audience from Flint.
Sir.
Nobody believes that you took action. You had those levers there. Mark Edwards from
Sir,
Virginia Tech, bless his heart. No, just listen for a second.
Okay.
Had the opportunity. They have said things like, we failed to get EPA to take lead and water risks seriously. It's possible, another quote of his, and this is possible because the EPA has effectively condoned cheating on the lead and copper rule monitoring since 2006. He read your op-ed that you put out that was one of the most offensive things I could possibly imagine. And he says about you, EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, that effectively absolved EPA of any wrongdoing or any role in creating the Flint disaster. If you want to do the courageous thing, like you said Susan Hedman did, then you too should resign. Nobody's going to believe that you have the opportunity, you had the presence, you had the authority, you had the backing of the federal government, and you did not act when you had the chance. And if you're going to do the courageous thing, you too should step down.
My time has
Myself,
expired.
and I
Well,
will
now
not close this hearing until Mr. Cummings has equal time as well. But let me go to Administrator McCarthy. The lead and copper rule requires you by law to update it every 6 years. But you did not do that, correct?
It actually requires us to review it every 6 years to see if it needs.
You don't believe that it's required under law to actually update it?
There are many laws that.
You're just supposed to look at it?
No, sir, we were actively looking at this, we are actively looking at this rule. It is very challenging.
you said
if
it's-
you want to do a substantive revision to it.
Well-
If you want to do what the last administration did, just tweak it a bit, it doesn't take
Don't
that
blame
long.
the Bush administration. You've been in office for more than 7 years now. So you said, in your own words, that you were going to have this new rule out in 2013, correct?
I'm really not aware of that, sir. I know that the schedule that I'm aware of is a 2017 schedule.
You mean the 2018 is what we heard testimony?
Well, the draft would be out in 2017. That's what
See,
I'm aware of,
this is what's so frustrating. You have somebody like an expert like Mark Edwards come and tell us there's so many ways around this and there's so much confusion. Do you believe there's any confusion about the lead and copper rule?
I do believe that it can be strengthened, and I do believe there are weaknesses.
No, that's not what you asked, strengthened. I'm asking if you think there's any confusion.
Well, I believe there probably is confusion. I'm not the one on the receiving end of it, but we work to clarify that whenever anyone has it.
You're the administrator. What do you mean you're not on the receiving end
Well, I
of
meant
it?
because we manage the program, the states do the implementation, and they do the enforcement. And in this case, we were very clear to them what their responsibility was under the existing law. So while I understand we should strengthen the law, I agree.
So when
We had what we needed in place to prevent this from happening.
Really? But then why did it happen?
Because the state didn't implement and enforce appropriately.
So you sent Miguel Del Toro in February 2015 out to go do the testing.
That wasn't for a lead and copper rule testing. That was a testing for an individual in their home, which ended up being 3 houses where there was a localized problem. I did not have information until July 21st that there was a systemic problem with that system. Yet as soon as we knew there was any problem in 3 houses, we told them to start doing
No, you didn't. No,
the
you
proper
didn't.
treatment.
No,
I'm sorry,
because
we did.
But the timeline is such that Miguel Del Toro does the testing.
Yes.
The report gets leaked, which he feels he was reprimanded for. It gets released. The mayor calls the EPA, Susan Hedman, and says, "Is this report true? Should I be worried?" The answer is no, you have nothing to worry about. And the mayor went on television, we played it before this committee, and says it's safe to drink the water.
Sir, I think I've tried to explain that Susan did not dismiss the substance of the report. She indicated that it was interim, the data hadn't been quality controlled, and it wasn't leaked, it was actually sent out. It was in the newspapers.
That is
so the
I know
information
it was in the
available.
newspaper, and the ACL was pushing on it, and the person's home that she came to, it was out there.
And when
So
we learned in April,
why do the testing if you're just going to simply blame the state? I mean, there is no doubt, and the governor's admitted that the people and the information that were happening from the career bureaucrats at the Department of Environmental Quality got it wrong. But let me read to you this. This is, you said they did everything, that you immediately wanted to have everything done on the corrosion control, correct?
I said by starting April 24th, when we realized that they were not doing corrosion control, we told them under the current law they should do it.
Okay, well, I'm going to enter into the record a email. Who's Jennifer Crooks?
She is one of our staff people, our managers in the water program in the region.
Is she competent?
As far as I know, I don't know her personally.
Okay, well, on July 1st, she sends, and there are a lot of DEQ personnel on here, and I'm going to read part of what she says. You just said that you told them to introduce the corrosion control in April. This is what she wrote to the Department of Environmental Quality. The idea to ask Flint to simply add phosphate may be premature. There are many other issues and factors that must be taken into account which would require a comprehensive look at the water quality and the system before any treatment recommendations can and should be made.
Let me explain that, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Because that actual advice came from Miguel. Because when I say you need to do treatment, it does not mean that I have a switch to turn on. He indicated that the agency didn't have the full water quality data. That's when we demanded and offered and begged to be on their technical advisory.
You were. This was a
So that-
conference. It was a summary of the conference call between DEQ and the EPA.
No, there was a Flint Technical
What do you mean, no?
Advisory Committee. I'm sorry.
Look, the public can look at this for themselves. Well, without.
Okay, but it was not as easy as flipping a switch. It did not mean that they didn't need to require to do it. The question was whether we were going to be premature in how best to get that done.
No, what you did is you came here and you blamed solely the state. And I'm here to tell you, the state has a big part of this blame. I'm not trying to excuse them whatsoever. But you're trying to excuse everything from the EPA saying you told them to put phosphates in the water and they didn't.
Sir, I'm not trying
The
to
document,
blame,
no,
I'm trying to get
wait till I'm
facts
done
on
asking you the
record.
question. The documentation says that you actually had a conference call from the EPA telling DEQ to not do it yet.
No, we were telling them that they had to do corrosion control. The method and treatment depended on experts to tell them how to do it. We offered that consistently from
What did
March
you tell-
on, and they actually never even took us up on it till September.
That's not
when-
true. Well, I'm going to enter the record. We entered this before, November 3rd. Who is Peter Gravatt?
He is the manager of our drinking water office and headquarters.
Yeah, he's the Washington, D.C. expert. Here's what he wrote, okay? This is November 3rd. It appears there are different possible interpretations of the lead and copper rule with respect to how the rule's optimal corrosion-controlled treatment procedures apply to this situation, which may have led to some uncertainty with respect to the Flint water system. So here you have a city who's begging for help. They know they're in trouble, okay? They're asking for that help, and I've got email after email from the Environmental Protection Agency saying, you know what, maybe you should hold off because we're not sure. Maybe there is confusion under the lead and copper rule. Maybe we are supposed to do 6 months of testing. I'm not excusing them at all, but you need to take some responsibility because you screwed up and you messed up 100,000 people's lives. 100,000 of them. 10,000 of those people are 6 years old and younger. And you take no responsibility. You don't think you did anything wrong, right? You don't think there's anybody did anything wrong.
I already indicated that we could have worked more aggressively. I
Yeah.
wish we had. Can I explain the memo? Would you like me to?
I want you to have an appreciation and an understanding of why the DEQ people are confused by the direction from the Department of Environmental, from the EPA.
There was no confusing signal sent from the agency.
What were they
during this
supposed to
period
do?
of time.
Should they have put the phosphates in the water, yes or no?
Not dumping it in without connecting with the experts, and they did not have the expert voice at the table because they refused to let us to the table.
They were at the table. It comes from
That
the
is not
EPA.
Sir,
She
I'm
starts
sorry.
the email.
That is not the task force we're talking
Okay.
about to provide technical expertise.
Okay, let's go through the list. Leanne Smith, Richard Benzie, Chris Phillip, Carrie Monosmith, Dana, I'm going to mispronounce their last name.
It's okay.
Going through
sir,
this, hold on.
I don't know those individuals, so.
Yeah, they all work for you. And the EPA,
some of them work for the
here's
state.
what it says. Here's what it says. I'm sorry, DEQ, but from the EPA.
Yes.
Thank you, Governor. Governor knows who works for him. Here's it. Below are my draft notes from our call last week. Thank you all for participating. I apologize, first apology I had seen, for the delay in getting out this draft for you to all review. And it says, don't simply add the phosphates. All I want you to acknowledge is that there should be
Because
some.
it could have created more damage than it cured.
Exactly.
Water systems are
Exactly.
difficult and deserve technical experts, which they did not have available. We did. They wouldn't let them at the table.
They were at the table. They were in the
That
same
is not the
conversation.
table. That is a semi-annual call we have with the department where we share information. If you look through the record, we consistently said we have national experts, we want to help. We had worked behind the scenes to figure out how we could do that. We just never got invited, nor were we accepted at the table at that point.
Yeah, I'm going to go through my last point, and then we'll get to Mr. Clay here. You said you didn't have the authority to do, I want to read to you part of the law here. Okay? This is Section 1431, Part D Part D, Section 1431 of the Emergency Powers within the Safe Drinking Water Act. It says, the administrator, that would be you,
Yes.
upon receipt of information that a contaminant which is present in or likely to enter a public water system, and I'm skipping ahead because it qualifies for terrorist attacks and all those types of things, which may present an imminent and substantial endangerment to the health of persons, and that appropriate state and local authorities have not acted to protect the health of such persons, may take such actions as he may deem necessary in order to protect the health of such persons. So if they weren't doing what you wanted them to do, why didn't you take action earlier?
I'm surprised, Mr. Chairman. The second part is about states' rights and what we have to do.
What do you mean the second part?
There is a two-part process to us actually issuing a 1431. The second is we need to make sure that the states aren't already taking appropriate action. That's what's so infuriating.
So when did you know that they didn't do it?
We knew July 21st that there was a systemic problem. The state agreed the next day, and then all they did was slow walk it. That's why we had to do it the way we did. I wished we had gone further. I wish we had gone farther. I wish we had yelled from the treetops. But there is no way that my agency created this problem, or there was ambiguity in the existing law that wouldn't have done the same thing that the governor said, which was let them know to use your common sense, don't put people at risk, just because we couldn't figure out that in the life of us, in our guidance, we never thought that anybody would go from a treated system to an untreated system and not treat it. I didn't think we ever had to say that, because I never thought anyone would. That's where we are today.
You can't have it both ways. You can't have people on the ground testing it, people like Miguel del Toro doing those types of tests, sending up the warning flags. No, sending up the warning flags and then not acting.
Okay,
I'm going well past my time. We'll recognize the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Ms. McCarthy, for being here. As usual, I'm still disappointed that you were alone on that panel, but thank you for being here. Ms. McCarthy, are you aware that the federal agencies are required under the Endangered Species Act to review any discretionary action they plan to undertake to see if it may affect endangered species or their critical habitat, and that if the agency determines that endangered species or their critical habitat may be affected, they must consult with Fish and Wildlife Service?
I am aware.
Did EPA consult with Fish and Wildlife on its activity on the Gold Key mine prior to the August 5th disaster?
EPA had no reason to consult with them because we did not plan to take action that would have discharged that amount of material into the creek.
So you assert that you did not anticipate the release. At least that's the email. And I'm glad, you two agencies weren't talking before. I'm glad we finally forced you to actually have some communication last night before you send this through. But your assertion is you did not anticipate the release that it would affect downstream endangered species. So therefore, you didn't consult with Fish and Wildlife.
We were actually there, Mr. Chairman, because of the threat of that release in attempting to
You did not
mitigate that
contact
threat.
them because you assert you didn't anticipate that. Now, is that what you and your
We were
staff
there
are
to
saying?
prevent that type of release. That's exactly right.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said.
We were there to actually prevent a release, because that is the reason why we were working with the state of Colorado and others at the site, was to try to depressurize it.
I understand.
if
That's
that
cool.
was
I
an
appreciate that. But
Okay.
the fact is, you did not talk to Fish and Wildlife, even though that is the law that you're supposed
Only if we are
to.
taking action, as you indicated, sir. That's
No, I'm
what
sorry.
the
Ms.
requirement.
McCarthy, listen to this. In the final health and safety plan, emergency and rapid response services for the Gold Key site, prepared by the Environmental Restoration, that's your contractor, for EPA Region 8 and dated September 4th, 2014. It contains a section entitled Spills, Leaks, or Releases. And it states, locate the source and stop the flow if it can be done safely. The task order statement of work for EPA Region 8 prepared by the Environmental Restoration, this is dated July 25th, 2014. Conditions may exist that could result in a blowout of the blockages and cause a release of a large volume of contaminated mine water and sediment from inside the mine, which contains concentrated heavy metals. Clearly, these documents demonstrate that, in fact, you did not only anticipate the possibility of a release, but also of a major blowout. And yet, EPA conducted no consultations with Fish and Wildlife as is required under the Endangered Species Act. Now, are you aware that these activities are both criminal and civil penalties for knowingly violating the Endangered Species Act?
Sir, I'm really not trying to argue with you. I'm trying to explain that the statement you're reading indicates that we were worried about those conditions existing. We clearly stated it to the contractor so that there would be no actions taken that would have caused that release, but instead we were there to prevent that release.
That is wonderful, but ma'am, the
That's-
fact is, we're anticipating this type of thing happening. The law that you insist everyone else obey, the law says you have to contact Fish and Wildlife and consult with them. The fact is, you did not do it, and you had over a year to accomplish that fact.
Sir, if I was there to take action to release this material, we wouldn't be standing here today. We were taking action in an attempt to prevent that release, knowing that it was a considerable risk to leave it as it was.
That is sweet, and I appreciate that, and I know you feel terrible about it, but the bottom line is, your documents say you anticipated a potential major blowout. And the law says if you anticipate a major blowout, you have to contact Fish and Wildlife. And until last night, you did not contact Fish and Wildlife. Your agency did not do it. That's what the law requires. And there are criminal and civil penalties for violating that law, which you violated. Now, I don't really care what your goal was. It may be noble. It doesn't make a difference. You violated the law. A standard you make everyone else live by, you violated, and you're doing it with impunity. Now, are you aware that the San Juan River, starting in Farmington, New Mexico, there's a designated critical habitat for endangered fish that would be violated, a violation of the ESA for an agency to cause adverse modifications of the habitats by spilling millions of gallons of this water and these heavy metals? You realize that that area does exist?
I was not aware until you just said it, sir, no.
So have you or your agency discussed EPA's failure to consult with Fish and Wildlife Service prior to this hearing or any of our requests prior to this hearing?
We do not believe that we actually constituted a failure to actually notify concerning endangered species because the actions we were taking were intended to stop a blowout. Clearly, there was a problem at the site. That's what we're looking at now to identify.
All right, I appreciate you making your own interpretation of the law, but that's not what the law requires, and that is not what the law says.
Okay, sir.
You violated the law, period.